I think the other sort of wonderful thing about Innocence and being 4 years old is you don't really have any idea what it's going to take to go to
Yeah.
Mars or what the dangers are, and and what kind of people you'd have to send to get there. I mean, it's just Jesus Christ, 9 months in a spaceship. I mean, that's like solitary confinement, man.
Attention, all citizens of the future. Buckle up and step into our time tunnel of imagination to join us on an extraordinary journey into the days of futures past. Remember those flying cars and space rockets, the robot maids and cities on Mars that dazzled your childhood dreams of life beyond? This, my friends, is where our adventure begins. So let's go to our guide, that excavator of the eventual, that historian of the hereafter, that recorder of retro futures, Theo Priestley.
Hello and welcome to Days of Futures Past, a podcast about reminiscing on retrofuturism. I have with me today's guest, Charlie Fink. Charlie writes the weekly Forbes column This Week in XR and co-hosts its companion podcast. He is the author of critically acclaimed AR-enabled books, no less, Charlie Fink's Metaverse and Convergence, How the World Will Be Painted with Data. Fink teaches at Chapman University in Orange County, California, and at ASU. Charlie, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Theo. Happy to be here.
So let's start actually with looking a little bit into the past, but not too far. 2023, we've seen a lot of a change, I guess, and maybe more of the same as well. Promises for AR, VR, and AI. I mean, what's your take? You've written a lot about this over the last year, but what's your perspective so far?
Well, first of all, I would say that I agree with Roni Abovitz, my podcast co-host. Roni was the co-founder, the former CEO and founder of Magic Leap. And Roni says that AI is exactly what XR has been waiting for. Now, a lot of other things are going to happen, but they already are when you see Ray-Ban stories with using the camera as an outward-facing sensor and integrating AI apps into the audio of the headset. They seem like small things. Most of this horsepower resides on your smartphone, but they're talking about adding a display now, and they've got tremendous potential. And the nicest thing about them is they're good glasses. They're comfortable, they're attractive. Their partnership with Luxottica, I think, has turned out to be terrific. They're going to be showing off the new model as well as potentially upcoming models at CES. I'm looking forward to seeing them next week.
Do you think that was what lacked with Google Glass in a sense? Was that the AI component where it actually made it a little bit more, I guess, intelligent, or was Glass always doomed because it was somehow fumbled with the consumer side?
I just don't think it was good enough, to be honest.
Too early.
It was also a micro display, which is a form of assisted reality. So, and sort of technology looking for an application. It was a small screen. You don't have to pick up your phone and look at a monitor. It's, a screen reflector, or, it's showing you, this little tiny display. They're quite cheap now. They're like $5 if you buy them in bulk. And these are things the size of a postage stamp. And they sit in your peripheral field of view, and you refer to them when you need additional content and you need to be heads up and hands free. And that is why it became so popular among enterprise users of AR. But it's also, for consumers, it just wasn't nearly good enough, nearly friction-free enough. There were not enough applications. One of the problems that XR has today is that it is technology in search of an application, right? It doesn't take something we're already doing and make it much better and cheaper. I'll give you a great example of that aside from Amazon. Take a look at what they've done with integrating AI into Google Bard. It's made searching much easier and much better. And I will add, Google did that at the expense of their ad business, which was the right thing to do. But I'm not sure many other companies, either have the resources or the nerve to make a change that dramatic. I mean, a disruption in search is a very, very big thing.
Do you think, though, with a lot of the AI content being generated, that's actually going to impact the search? That's
I'm sorry. What do you mean by AI content?
Well, generative AI content, shall we say?
Okay, so you're talking about the output.
The output, yeah. So I'm producing AI generative output, and somehow that is that going to impact search at all in terms of the relevancy or even their accuracy?
Well, accuracy, you can ask Bard for annotations. Microsoft Bing generates them automatically. In the old days, I would have to go and check those citations and read all those articles on all those different platforms and do the synthesis myself. And that's sort of the repetitive grunt work of being an online journalist today. And the new tools make that job go much faster and be much easier. And that's why I've adopted it, because you'd be a fool not to take advantage of a shortcut that's going to save you, going to enable you to generate the same content 50% faster.
You've produced an AR-enabled book. Do you want to elaborate on that? Because I've got in my mind what I think it is, but just for everyone listening and watching.
It's a book that you read with your smartphone in your hand, and there are markers and illustrations in the book which can be augmented. And the camera uses computer vision. You download an app, it uses computer vision to recognize the symbol, and then it can essentially anchor pop-up characters inside the camera, right? And there, it's the 360. You can walk around it, but it can also bring up color pictures, videos, all the things you can't have inside of a paper book. So, I mean, unfortunately, the publishing industry, except for novelties like a book about the Starship Enterprise, doesn't have a lot of interest in AR books because they increase the cost of the books. And books are already a very iffy business, particularly if you're, printing them on dead trees. So getting color plates into a book, very expensive. So, not only do you get dimensional animation, but you also get things that are just would otherwise be a click away were you reading the book on a computer. And you can still use the marker on content on the computer, although if you're not reading it flat like you would an iPad, it's going to look, some of the applications are a little janky, but you get the idea.
Do you think that with the advent of Meta's AR glasses then and things like that, that's actually, and with screens as well as just lenses, that's actually going to make it a little, bring it to life even more?
It'll be less friction for consumers to enjoy that kind of application, but it doesn't change the economic proposition for publishers.
Right. Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah. Yeah. So looking backwards a little bit further than 2023, and one of the things that really fascinated me when I asked you to come onto the podcast was that you've actually been to one of the world's fairs, and I am extremely envious, believe it, of this, because for me that was a period of I don't know, I called it unbridled imagination. It was just like we just went, yeah, absolutely. And we just went for trying to build or trying to imagine what it could be. And I'm really enjoying, I don't know if you've watched it, Hello Tomorrow on Apple TV with Billy Crudup. And it's almost, what would the world look like if the 50s and the World's Fair trade and expos actually became real, were reality? And so you have hover cars and you have the floating robots and things like that. But tell me, I mean, being there as a child must have been just awe-inspiring.
Sure, because I didn't know what those things were like in real life anyway. I didn't know how to drive a car. So the idea that a car could fly, I pretended to make cars fly all day long. Pretending was my job. In fact, I think my entire life has been shaped by that first job. But the Disneyland of the World's Fair of 1964, which they held over until 1967. It was extremely popular, and the fairgrounds are still there. And the giant steel globe that is so iconic was featured in Men in Black, which I thought was wonderful in the Men in Black movie, the first one, not to be surpassed. Anyway, I went as a kid and I wanted to go all the time. I was obsessed with it. So I think I went 3 times. Once with my mother, once with my big sister, and once with friends. So I had all the memorabilia. One time it rained, so we all got, World's Fair themed clear umbrellas, which were just so crazy in 1964, an umbrella that you could see through. The things that we saw, the video phones.
Mm.
Video phones, a real retro future thing, right? Because it was just a payphone. For those listeners who remember what those are, I suppose you've seen them in movies, but can you imagine? We just picked them up without a thought of who the last person was. And sometimes if you were at a bar, they didn't smell too good either. But we did it, And so we thought, video phone, it's a telephone with a television, right? Peanut butter and chocolate. Of course, we couldn't foresee, mobile devices and smartphones and their video capabilities. But it's pretty funny when you contrast them with today. And the other thing, as you mentioned, was flying cars. And of course, they couldn't make the cars fly, but they did show us how they could also be amphibious, which is kind of crazy, right? Because who would put their car in the water, even if it was okay to put your car in the water, right? Because, in boats, there are waves and, the car's not that buoyant. And even if it was, it's still not tall enough to be a boat. But it didn't matter when you were 4. When you were 4, just the idea of it was enough for you to get going in every conceivable direction. So, for me, the World's Fair to me was a revelation because that was the future I was supposed to meet as an adult. And of course, nothing could have been further than the truth when you become an adult in 1976, where you're a freshman in college, a junior adult. And of course, the world was very mundane then, even compared to today.
Do you think we've lost a bit of that magic now?
Oh, yeah. We've lost our innocence.
Yeah. There's no, I guess, with the invention of the internet and social media and everyone having access at information at the fingertips, there's no kind of sense of wonder because people instantly go off and research and then go, oh, well, that's not possible, or oh, that's just fantasy. I'm no longer interested in that. And then the imagination dies, and especially for kids.
The loss of wonder is a concern, but there are areas where we do still display that childlike fascination. SpaceX is one example. I'm just fascinated with this idea of going to Mars. On one hand, it's so exciting, and on the other hand, it's so totally horrifying. And I'm reading a book about ship voyages, a ship voyage in the 17th century. These guys are circumnavigating the globe. And to get from one place to another in one of those giant sailing ships took literally like a year to sail, through the, around Cape Horn. So, that was considered modern transportation then. It's funny, people forgive me for digressing. Every generation of humans lived the same life, basically, for 4,000 generations, 400,000 years, right? Basically, my ancestors and my great-grandfather lived in the same world. There were horses, there was wagons, boats still had sails. And then look at what's happened to us in the past 5 generations. So we've gone from being apes with guns. We have gone from, the pulley being high technology to being to having nuclear weapons. So we're not that far removed from being apes with guns. So, I don't think human nature has kept up with human science. And that was a concern of Einstein's and others as they started to introduce these technologies that suggested there was infinite potential to both huge invisible things like space travel
Mm.
and little tiny things like nanotechnology.
Do you
So,
think
but
we've
I
lost it? Oh, go on.
so those are things that still, for me, have a lot of excitement in them. Um, I still want to see rocket launchers. I want to see the spaceship dock with the space shuttle. I just am fascinated by that. And again, as a kid who grew up looking for movies like 2001 and Silent Running, I just,
Mm.
that world speaks to me. So I still think there is wonder, wonder about the deep. I think the whole disaster with that submarine
Mm.
speaks to people's desire to experience something that is so full of wonder and so impossible yet real. But I do think that, starting in the 70s before the digital age, the erosion of authority has certainly diminished our ability to experience things from an innocent place. I think we have become cynical. Every
Mm.
war is in our living room. Every negative thing is exaggerated 1,000 times by media, and it's passed around the social internet. I think the social media has been a horrendously backfiring, unintended consequence generating uh, invention. It was inevitable. We people want it, but its destructive power. I mean, it may have ended democracy.
Mm.
So its destructive power really can't be understated. That, of course, is the scary thing about AI. What are you and I really going to predict what's going to happen? I will say this, that the danger of deepfakes is already affecting people's perception of what happened in America on January 6th. You can't believe your lying eyes, right?
Mm.
I'm going to tell you all that stuff for January 6th generated by AI, and you want to believe it. You want to believe it so badly that you'll just accept that because you know that deepfakes are real. So something that you can't believe must be a deepfake. So without there actually existing bad actors using deepfakes to disrupt the truth, people are assuming the truth has already been a deepfake. So that's an example of something that stole our innocence.
Mm. Do you think that that optimism of the 50s versus the sort of realism and cynicism of today, do you think that optimism will ever return in the same way, or do you think we're always going to be this kind of cynical going forward?
One thing defines all human beings: Democrat, Republican, authoritarian, a liberal, is hope. So you're asking me, is hope ever going to die? No, hope is never going to die. We're not going to try and stop trying to make the world a better place.
Mm.
The majority of good people are
Yeah.
not going to try and are not going to stop trying to make the world a better place. It just becomes the internet and social media have taken it's no longer local. And the Fed that I think has been really another negative consequence is that it's de-emphasized the importance of locality, of participation, because you're part of a bigger, countrywide debate or
Mm.
even an international debate, like what's going on in uh, the Gaza Strip, the war, the October 7th war that they started against Israel, is being televised every day, and it's horrendous to see civilians caught in the crossfire and nobody really able to do anything to help them. So, because part of the strategy, obviously, of a group waging guerrilla war is to blend back into the population.
Mm.
So a uniformed military it's almost impossible, as we've seen in most recently in Iraq and Afghanistan. They know you're going to leave eventually. So it doesn't make any sense to support the invader. The invader's only going to be there temporarily, and then they're going to be left with the basically same group of, governing, the same kind of governing group, whatever its name is. It's going to be the same people, even if they call themselves the Liberal Party of Gaza. So, oh, Hamas is dead. It's the Liberal Party of Gaza that's the enemy now. So these things are heart-wrenching. They're heart-wrenching. I mean, whether you feel Israel has been attacked and is justified in its actions, it is horrifying to watch this on social media and the news every day. It's funny, too, because social media, we all knew that the internet was going to make sure that the truth could never be suppressed again. Mm. And we were very hopeful and optimistic about that in the 90s when I was working in the formative year, when I was working at AOL in the formative years of the internet. We were like, the gatekeepers are gone. Long live the people. But what we didn't realize in banishing the gatekeepers and supposedly freeing the truth was that we were also freeing lies and liars. And Winston Churchill famously said, a lie gets around the world before truth gets its pants on.
Yeah. But, in a sense, with the, especially with the current Palestinian and Israel war, we've seen, going back to your point about deep fakes, we've seen that being used in the media as well on both sides.
Well, you don't need to have a deep fake to edit a video to present your point of view. So I think the real threat is, again, looking at what's real and saying it's not real, rather than the deep fake itself being the threat. And, that's social media and people are getting good at using technology to identify a deep fake. But again, it's the threat of the deep fake that's going to cause the harm.
And that was something that was never, ever envisaged back then, in the 50s and 60s at all. No.
So I think that, having this knowledge of, it's just what we've gone through in the past 50 years has been incredible. Incredible. The transistor has led to changes the way we live, changes in the relationship of parents and children, changes in the relationship with our neighbors and our churches. So these are profound effects on society that will only be properly analyzed 100 years from now.
Now, talking of hope, there are some things that, that you don't think will ever come to fruition. Even in the next 25 years, there will always be something like another 10 years out before we see this.
Well, that's the beauty of being a futurist. You just revise your view of the future every year, and all technology is 5 to 10 years away. But I did make a bet with Bob Scoble in 2018 that we were not going to see all day, everyday wearables until the second half of the next decade, which would be after 2015. And I'm right on schedule. I still haven't gotten the steak dinner from Bob, but I think that was a pretty good guess. I don't know whether they will scale, right? I don't know whether they're going to sell 10 million of these things or whether they're going to sell 100 million of them. Again, there's a lot of friction associated with wearing a video display. It I think is evolving toward being a smartphone accessory that allows you to view a larger screen when you want it. Maybe you're doing work on the go or you're a gamer. I think there are obvious ways. You want to watch a baseball game and you're, at work or someplace or on your break, and there it is right in your $300 accessory. I don't think anybody anticipated that was the way that AR was going to go, right? We all thought it was going to have an onboard computer and that it would do spatial computing and that we would be anchoring and combining digital content and real content, sort of the way we do on our phones now, but through glass, not through the being digitally remixed inside of the camera. So lots of things we didn't really understand how they were going to evolve in technology. I mean, it's sort of like, why would you put the computer on the glasses if you have a smartphone in your pocket? What is the point of doing that?
Yeah.
Now, they all need to be tethered still because of the battery issue. That's the other issue. Batteries are hot. If you use a VR headset for an hour, you know that it gets hot. It starts to dry out your eyes. You start to sweat more because, your face has been heated up to 105 degrees. So there are real problems that still have not been solved. That I have no doubt they will be solved. But when they are solved, how many people really want to live in the metaverse? Now, there are tens of millions of people playing Fortnite. If Fortnite is the metaverse, and I'm not going to take on whether it is or not, but if Fortnite is the metaverse, it's already got nearly 1 billion users. But
So it's not going to be.
But so what?
Yeah.
So it's a video game that has a lot of users. They could sell advertising. They could sell accessories like Meta wants to do. I suspect Meta or someone else will be successful in building something like the Oasis from Ready Player One. I have no doubt that that is going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. And you were asking me about how AI would work. You'll be able to talk worlds and environments into existence. I'll be able to say, Theo, let's meet on the beach. And with a snap of my fingers, you and I will be on the beach, on the virtual beach.
Yeah.
But is that going to make hundreds of millions of people want to use it? Gamers are very satisfied with game consoles. I think we've established that VR, not a fantastic game, not competitive with game consoles. It's not. Now, could it be someday? I don't know. I'm skeptical because of the convenience of sitting on your couch and playing very immersive games versus standing up and wearing a VR headset. I think those are very different experiences. And the VR headset one has a lot of friction and is not something I would do every day, like watching television. Is that changing? I mean, sure, there are groups who will use it, but right now it's very niche. And it's good. The technology is pretty good now. So no fair blaming the technology. This is something that is not clear that consumers want. In other words, it's not going to be the Nintendo Switch. It's not going to be the Sony PlayStation. It's going to be more of a niche technology. Yeah, is it a business? Kind of, sort of. It'll kind of cruise along being a niche thing, which, for a small shop could be very lucrative. But you'll see the big AAA game companies saying, not as good as the console business. If, you want us in VR, you have to pay up.
Well, I think the pandemic kind of showed us what was potentially a window to that, which was everybody expected to rush towards VR, metaverse type or online virtual environments for meetings and things like that. And then as soon as the pandemic ended and the shutters came up and the doors opened, everybody rushed back to real life conferences, met people you could touch and
right.
shake hands with folks.
All that additional usage that video games and mobile phones were getting went away because people now had other things to do. So that was entirely predictable. It made 2023 somewhat of a depressed year and 2022 especially somewhat of a depressed year as people readjusted to the economy going back to, or work going back to normal. That said, as somebody who works largely remotely, except for my one teaching day, remote work is going to continue to grow. I think it doubled during the pandemic and it has not gone down. So there were 6% of people doing remote work, and now I think it's 15% or 20%. So that's a pretty dramatic change, but that just accelerated something that was already happening, right? If everybody is sitting at work with their headphones on, staring at their laptop screen, do they really need to be in the same room? As far as VR and the pandemic goes, it is unfortunate that VR wasn't quite ready for prime time when the pandemic hit in early 2020. The Quest had just come out, Quest 1. Quest 1 was okay. It's nothing compared to Quest 3, which is more of a mixed reality device. I think Meta is wisely moving away from games that compete head on with console games, and they're using mixed reality and other technology to try and push this in another direction. But again, it's technology searching for an application. So when I look at the Quest and I look at, its higher tech competitor, the Apple Vision Pro, I just wonder what the killer application is that's going to make someone say, it's like, what's the Game of Thrones for VR? What is the thing that makes people say, I don't care if it's $250, I've got to get Game of Thrones? And so that doesn't really exist for XR or VR. I think Apple knows this. They're depending on the millions of apps and tens of thousands of developers who are successfully working on mobile apps in the App Store. Because this is all part of the iOS ecosystem, they're hoping those developers will start to populate the App Store with software that addresses the terrific technology they've built into this headset,
Mm.
and that the killer app will emerge from one of those. And I don't think that's a bad approach. I think it's kind of crazy to think about the amount of money that has been invested in something for which, outside of enterprise and training, simulation and training, continuing to be the killer app for XR. I don't know what the consumer one is. I honestly don't know. Now, when I wrote Convergence, I said when AI is powerful enough to be a true co-pilot, that we will want it as a wearable and it will have a lot of sensors. But all that may happen through audio. It may not necessarily happen through glasses. I've got ChatGPT on my smartphone and I sometimes use it using audio. I mean, the audio only ChatGPT is pretty good. And I think Meta is iterating on that too. So those are all very promising things. And if you do them through audio, like in the Ray-Ban, I guess they call Ray-Ban Stories,
Mm.
that's supposed to be quite good. I've not used it yet, so I don't want to seem to be endorsing it. But the idea of it is very powerful, especially if you start integrating sensors. Now, the AI pin from Humane, which is in its very early stages, it doesn't have a screen. You hold up your hand like it's a breast sensor that's integrated in your headset, and you want to see something, you want to see video or something, you just hold up your hand and it projects on your head. So,
Yeah,
those
I'm
are
not sure.
those are all form factors that have a chance. And by the way, before wearable displays become popular, it may be that we have other technologies that leapfrog it.
Mm.
Maybe you're going to put something behind your ear and it pricks your skin and you see it that way.
Do you think you're looking back, the 5-year-old you looking and seeing something like Meta wearable glasses or the Apple Vision Pro as a concept, you would have understood, and seen.
I would have understood it as television. You can only understand, unfortunately, humans can only understand the future in the context of today. That is why the phone booth in 2001 was a television combined with a payphone. Because they could all, Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick in their day in the late 60s were, oracles of the future. I mean, they were viewed as the leading authorities on envisioning, what the world in 50 years could look like. And it is kind of funny how wrong they were, but also how right they were.
Do you think that futurists of today are too worried about getting things wrong and so pull back
No,
a lot? No?
no, we're bullshit artists like me never pull back. We just spew more, better, improved bullshit. Well-informed bullshit.
I'll take that one. One of the other things that struck me that you thought would never see again, or certainly never work in the next 25 years, is space planes.
Space planes. Well, first of all, the military just launched its first space plane. If there were going to be space planes, they're not going to be civilian means of transport at the beginning.
A bit like the Chinese. Chinese have one as well, don't they?
These are reusable vehicles that would take you up there and repair satellites. So I don't think they've been built with transportation of hundreds of people in mind. Now, we did have the Concorde and supersonic transportation. It was crazy expensive. So airlines would rather it take 6 hours and they spend less money on fuel than have it fly through space really quickly. Also, something that flies through space like that is very hard to use all day, every day, which is the way an airplane is used. I think the average airplane is in the air something like 16 hours a day. So can a space plane really do that? I think now we're we're not dealing with electronics. We're dealing with physics. We're dealing with heat. We're dealing with the atmosphere. So I don't think these things are so. And the rockets themselves are, I suppose Elon Musk is making them reusable, but it is still very, very expensive to launch one of those. You would never do that for a civilian aircraft. So I think this idea of it happening in the next 25 years is kind of funny. 25 years is not that long ago. People don't, young people your age, Theo, don't understand how short a period 25 years is. When you say, oh, is it going to happen in 5 years? I kind of laugh because 5 years is like tomorrow. 5 years is like 2019. If you went back in time in 2019, you wouldn't even know it. So when people say 5 years, I'm always very skeptical because 5 years is nothing.
Yeah. Is there something that you've seen in the past, even going back to your childhood, that you thought would have happened by now?
Again, I was always a fan in my science fiction heart of hearts in flying cars. But practically it would be it's sort of like, what could go wrong? And so will we have these sort of drone taxis, electric drone taxis buzzing around overhead? Well, sure, the rich always find a way to have that sort of thing first. But I think it will be like, Kobe Bryant flying through the fog, an extremely, extremely dangerous and crazy expensive thing to do. Will people do it? Sure. Will it be a big business? I kind of doubt it because where are the things going to land? It still has to fit a person.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of trees around here and wind. So is there going to be some drone landing place in a giant parking lot nearby? I mean, it's just the practicality of it is kind of silly to think about. So as much as I would like to have a drone land out front and take me to LAX in 20 minutes, I just don't see that happening. I see it being very sexy for headlines. I see it make great, fantastic art, and the kind of thing that people are having a lot of fun with using generative AI. But it will remain a science fiction staple. I know there are real companies with real financing trying to figure this out, but I just don't think it's gonna work. But I love being wrong. So for something like that to happen in my lifetime would be truly amazing.
Maybe something like the line in Neom will make it happen, because obviously you have to build, from scratch the infrastructure to be able to handle something like this. But I could never see it on the streets of Edinburgh. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we're having trouble putting in enough charging stations. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
These things are very, very mundane in the end. When you're dealing with atoms, you cannot move them around at will. And so that is why we love our technology so much. There's no friction, right? But the minute you try and put something into the physical world, now the forces of nature array themselves against you. We've solved the problem of the transistor and moving little pieces of electricity around. We have not solved the difficulty that moving goods, services, and food around. It's still, we're still in the 1950s there.
Do you think we'll see men on the moon? Last question, or even actually another base? Will we see?
Yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. I think that it's gotten inexpensive enough, and the ability to set up mining operations and other commercial ventures on the moon, I think, is coming into focus. I also think, again, a Mars colony. Will people get to Mars in my lifetime? That's 25 years from now. It's possible. It's possible. Again, I think the question is the rover finding gold there or lithium or something that we want that would provide an economic incentive to do that? Or will the moon do that? So I do think we'll get to the moon. I do think at some point there will be a moon based there of some kind. Mars is really, really far away.
Mm.
So unless there's some kind of, 9 months to get to Mars, like I said, that's like ancient sailing trips. And they still haven't really determined what happens to the human body with 9 months of radiation in deep space. Also true of the moon, although presumably they would be inside of shielded environments most of the time.
Mm.
But even in a spaceship, apparently radiation becomes a really, really big deal. So you want to have a dozen people get to Mars and half of them have cancer.
Well, we saw the Kelly twins, the astronauts, Scott Kelly and his brother, who's one of them remained on Earth while the other one was orbiting, and they compared genes, and they were significantly different with So it's it is going to be a real problem for the longer trips.
There's a lot we don't know. So
Mhm.
I don't know that deep space travel is completely solved, but of course I've been fantasizing about it since I was a kid. It's still possible as opposed to, cars that fly. And every time I see, there are new car startups all the time that have things like flying cars. And if you live in Kentucky and you can land on the street next to your house and you have a pilot's license, maybe it's like a cool thing. But again, the guy's got a pilot's license. This isn't like my next door neighbor or the old lady up the street flying around. But no, I mean, of course it's going to be controlled by a computer. No passenger. Even the guy driving down the road in Kentucky who has a pilot's license, it still, as far as I'm concerned, doesn't make any sense. How is he going to park that car at the mall? Right? How's he going to go on vacation in that car? What happens in the winter when it's got snow on it? Is it grounded? Can you still use it as a car? Is it worth using it as a car because it would be so heavy, it probably would give you terrible mileage? So again, now you've involved atoms, goddammit, and they don't do what we say with a little jolt of electricity. It's much, much more complicated. We have to remake them in order for them to react. So these are things that they still require giant factories that are, bigger than your whole neighborhood with, 1,000 workers and giant cranes. And it's like shipbuilding.
Mm.
I mean, it's not that different than shipbuilding in the 18th century, right? They just, they've got these dry docks and you walk by there. I mean, again, in the 18th century, that was the only way goods got around. So they'd have tremendous shipbuilding capacity on every coast. Right? In every city would have a shipbuilding capacity because that's how important ships were. So I think that's sort of airplanes have taken over, although obviously the modern economy is totally dependent on ships. I don't know there are ships anybody ever could have conceived of filled with, covered with, thousands of shipping containers, bigger than, the World Trade Center. It's just kind of crazy to imagine it, but I mean, again, logistics and transportation, when you look at what's happened in the past 50 years, it's just unbelievable, right? They used to eat, when I was a kid, they were still loading bananas into the cargo hold using giant nets. And today, of course, that would all be in a shipping container that would just be lifted, into the pile of 1,000 shipping containers and, it would be refrigerated and get where it was going in a couple of weeks, and there we have fresh bananas from South America that were transported at the price of 5 cents a pound. It's gone up, of course, way up, but that's how you start an international economy when it's 5 cents to ship it, 5 cents a pound. How can you not take advantage of the economy of doing it overseas? They used to ship Scottish salmon. There's a book called 90% of Everything. And an example of how everything is on one of those giant transport ships, they use the example of Scottish salmon, which are caught off the coast of Scotland, shipped frozen to China, where they are processed into canned salmon. And then they are shipped back to Scotland, where they are distributed to stores and in airports and places where tourists buy them so they can take home some of the famous Scottish salmon. So that is a great story. It is Scottish salmon, but the expensive part was not shipping it around. It was canning it. So they offloaded that to China. So that's how 90% of everything ends up on a boat eventually. Although, there's a relocalization of the economy happening at the same time, which can only be good for the U.S. because we shipped a lot of our manufacturing capacity overseas, and it has created a very lopsided economy. And now we want those jobs back. It's again not so easy, but I think there's that movement is real. Yeah, we'll see more chip factories and things like that in the U.S. Because it's a national security issue. The U.S. can't be cut off from its supply of microprocessors. It just cannot be. So therefore, you can't rely on getting them cheaply made in Taiwan.
Again, something that I don't think the atomic age back in the 50s ever predicted.
No, the level of complexity is really, I think the other sort of wonderful thing about Innocence and being 4 years old is you don't really have any idea what it's going to take to go to Mars or what the dangers are and what kind of people you'd have to send to get there. It's just, Jesus Christ, 9 months in a spaceship. That's like solitary confinement, man. I guess people have done it on the International Space Station, so it can be done, but I don't think it's something people are going to casually do, fly back and forth to Mars. I think you get to Mars, you're not going to, it's like people go to Australia on a plane, you don't want to stay for 5 days, right? You want to be there for a month. But I don't know. I think a moon base would satisfy me. It's so funny. In 1969, we thought we'd have a moon base in 10 years.
Have you been watching For All Mankind?
Oh, yeah. Hell yeah. The first season of All Mankind and also the second season of All Mankind were really fantastic. I think they've kind of run out of story a little bit. I don't think the 70s are as cool as the 50s. I just think it's the later seasons. I don't know if we're on season 3 or 4, but they're kind of becoming a space opera. When you set something inside of a moon base or Mars base, that's a pretty limited set. And so what was beautiful and visually exciting has suddenly become, very industrial and flat. And they try and thematically deal with that and deal with the effects of that dramatically, but it's boring. It's boring. It's the boring part of space. Right? It's like you don't want to see somebody working in the salt mines of the moon. You want to see them landing in a rocket and driving around in a moon rover. I don't want to see that guy underground 12 hours a day trying to mine lithium or whatever. But so that's sort of the direction that For All Mankind has gone. And so it's just not as visually interesting to me, unfortunately. I think the same thing happened to The Expanse. Which is a terrific TV series about sort of what the world could look like in 500 years. And I thought it was terrifically interesting for the first 3 to 5 episodes. And then kind of more of the same. Part of it is, David Mamet said, all drama is about lies. When lies are revealed, the show is over. So I sort of feel like For All Mankind kind of, but I've been watching it. The premise of it is it's the same premise as what's that show where the Nazis win World War II? It's a future history, science fiction history.
Yeah.
So
Man in a High Castle.
Man in a High Castle. So that's a similar show to All Mankind, which says, if the space program had gone a different direction, what could that direction have been? And the same thing goes for the Man in the High Castle. What would the world be like if the Germans had won World War II? Right. But so they had the Japanese fleet in San Francisco Harbor. They did all these cool things again, but the problem was that with them, that they had no secrets to them. They had no sustained dramatic tension, which I think the first few seasons of For All Mankind had. And I think they've lost that. I don't know when you've lost it, if you can get it back.
It could well be the fact that we've got back to that, back to the beginning of the conversation where you have that optimism versus realism. And the optimism in the first couple of seasons was, you know, here we are, we're pushing back towards the moon, we're going to build moon bases. And then you have the realism, which is, well, this is what it's going to be like when we actually live there.
I think that's put exactly right. So the getting there was so exciting, but the being there is so unexciting. They've had to manufacture drama that we really don't care about, right? We don't really care about the strike of workers on the moon. I mean, I get that may happen, and I get the tension of having civilian workers on a military base and everything they're talking about now, except it's boring, except it's not sexy. Except, there's no place for them to go. There's nothing there. There's no vintage Mustangs. There's nothing.
Charlie, this has been great chatting to you about some of your memories of Retrofutures and also projecting forward as well in terms of what we might or might not see and what we might experience if we ever get to the moon, for example. Where can folks find more about you? Obviously, you have your Forbes column, but where else do you lurk?
If you go to charliefink.com, you will learn everything you will ever want to know about me and my activities. I urge you to listen to the This Week in XR podcast. My co-host, Roni Abovitz, is famous. We're also joined by Ted Shilowitz, who is one of the co-inventors of the Red Camera and is the futurist for Paramount Global. And we have great guests, industry guests every week, but it's part of my beat to cover XR, AI, XR, and Metaverse. So those are kind of the waters we swim in, although we cover all tech news. There is a bias toward those technologies. It's, we do news recap for 15 minutes, and then we bring in the guests. So it's not a very long podcast, but I think that's kind of what people like about it. I'm a news hound. I read the news all week. I use that to write my weekly column. And it also becomes the script for the podcast. But Roni and Ted are sort of raw color, if you will, as I do the play-by-play. So it's a very popular podcast. We just passed 300,000 downloads. Next week, we're recording show 176. And of course, it's an exciting moment in my world because CES starts next week. So that's what's going on. charliefink.com. Theo, I love the premise of your show. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too. Thanks, Charlie.
This is Days of Futures Past signing off, when we'll once again peel back the curtain on more lost futures. Stay tuned, and remember, the future may be here, but the past never fades. Until next time. Days of Futures Past was brought to you by Theo Priestley, keynote speaker, author, and retrofuturist. If you'd like to appear as a guest and reminisce about futures gone by, get in touch. I've been your radio host, Andrew Helbig. Goodbye for now.